Wonderful. Good day, good evening, good morning to wherever you are in the world. I hope you're all safe and sound. We have a fantastic panel right now focusing on how to serve customers in the new normal. You're in great hands in this session, not because of the moderator, because we have three fantastic panelists who come from very diverse backgrounds. I'll start with Lisa Garay de Verbier, who comes from AXA. She's the global head of the women's market. And AXA knows well about the issues about leading in insurance and asset management, particularly in a first-hand world where COVID and the changes have come. And there's been a huge impact of the pandemic across the world as it relates to people, women, and people of all natures. Charity Mwanza is CEO of a one-year-old startup called Digital Pago. It's a recently launched fintech that provides digital shared services that bridge the gap between banks, mobile network operators, digital financial services, and other fintechs. And last but not least, Atul, who's joining us from Goa today. He's the founder and CEO of Scriptbox. Scriptbox is a digital platform that is focused around simplifying and democratizing wealth management. Recently launched in India, and now even more recently, Singapore and UAE, and it really focuses in enabling its users to worry less about money by leveraging automated algorithm-driven financial planning, as well as education and advice according to investors' life stages. Fantastic. Welcome, everyone. Welcome all of our panelists as well as our viewers. I want to just open with a few comments as we think about the new normal itself. This has been a crazy year, I think, no matter where you are in the globe and no matter what type of consumer you are. I read a recent piece of research that said it takes 66 days to form a new habit as a person, as a human. So if you think about all of the changes that we've been under and all of the changes that our customers have been under, what are the new habits that they have built in those 66 days? What are the habits that we need to support in today's new normal? What are the habits that we need to support in tomorrow's new normal? As we've talked many times, I think in these sessions around the Alliance for Women, that it's impossible to generalize the needs of women. And in fact, research shows they don't like to be generalized. And as we think about them as a segment, they're also different. They're also different as individuals, but regionally. It's also, I think, really hard to generalize the needs caused by the pandemic, because the pandemic has not affected people the same way, no matter what market you are, whether you're a man, woman, whether you're a person of color, etc. So thinking and unpacking that a little bit is going to be really important. And what you're going to hear today, I think, are a lot of ideas. I think we all feel that it's probably too early to call them trends. They're ideas based on the learnings that we're seeing and what we think might be opportunities for better serving customers in this new normal, whatever that may be. And then the last thing I want to say is I am the CXO of MasterCard, Chief Experience Officer, and there's a couple of things that, and focusing on customer needs is absolutely paramount at MasterCard and also with my role. There's a couple things that I wanted to call out in addition to that research statistic about 66 days to form new habits and what habits have been changed. Is one of the things that we have seen on a specifically payment level is a huge shift from payment with cash to payment to contactless, where markets are available. And that has been started by a concern around hygiene. But what I also feel is focusing on consumer behavior, what's starting as hygiene is actually going to move towards a desire to continue to do those things around touchless and full empowerment. Why do I need to interact with a cashier if I don't need to, or with money? How can I have more self-service along an entire touchless journey? So what we're seeing today actually has opportunities in the future. The very last thing I'll say is to build on my point that COVID has not affected people equally. It has not affected men and women equally. 23% of women, and particularly female business leaders, report spending 6 or more hours a day on domestic tasks versus 11% of males. So thinking about the balancing of domestic tasks, the cognitive load, and actually the role in business and what business leaders or consumers are doing is significant. So those are some things that we're thinking about here at MasterCard, as I said, with a kind of paramount focus around consumer and customer behavior at all times. So I want to turn it to our panelists And I'm going to start maybe with you, Lisa, first. And this is kind of and this maybe first question or set of questions is really thinking pre-pandemic. Before we can talk about what are the changes during and post-pandemic, I wanted to just kind of call out maybe some of the highlights. So as global head of the women's market at AXA, you've developed different solutions for a variety of countries. I think it's 15 different countries. Any highlights for what you could share with us around how have women's protection needs and preferences evolved over the last few years that you've been doing that, as we move into a conversation about what's next? So, Lisa.
Yes, so thank you very much for having me today. So I think that first, so it's true at AXA, we have been strongly committed on gender parity, both for our employees, but also our customers. And so one of the first things that made actually happen, the Women in Insurance initiative, was to look at the increasing role that women were playing in society today. So for the past 4 years, what we have seen is that women have this increasing role that when we analyze, so you said not trends, but we call it trends, we see that women are often the point of entry across industries, having multiple touch points to address their needs. So either on health, on nutrition, on goods. So they control almost 70% of purchasing decisions worldwide, and with that in mind, we see that they have an increasing income, a higher level of education, and also higher level of employment. And so for us, in terms of financial services, what does this mean? It means that as women have an increasing role in society, this translates into new protection needs that they will need to tackle with financial services. So we believe it's important for us at AXA to support these women to help minimize all the financial or health risk that they may face. So both as individuals, but also as entrepreneurs. And looking these past few years, what we have seen is that we can actually see 3 big dimensions. The first is everything around financial independence. Our research has found that women are primarily concerned with financial independence and not becoming a burden to their children. And so for us to tackle this, it means that we need to develop specific services to support women's financial independence. So through life insurance, credit protection, keeping in mind this part on how can we make sure that they will have this stability of income and protection over the years. The second big dimension is around health. And so in this one, it's a little bit tricky, I can say, because what we have seen is that women tend to put their health as medium to low priority, putting their children's health as a top priority. And so actually this morning I was giving the example, in the airplane, when they give you all the instructions, there is this in case of a crash that you need to put your mask first before putting the mask to the people that are depending on you. And so this obviously can be counterintuitive when you are a young parent and that you want to save your kids. But actually it's something very similar that we see with women towards their health attitude. And so the role that AXA we want to play is to make sure that we raise awareness on the fact that if women are on bad health, actually they cannot help and support their children. And so for that, it's important that they take into account their health and that they have the right offers and the right support, either in terms of women cancer, women diseases, but even on their health in general. And lastly, so we were hearing the women entrepreneur just before, so obviously there is entrepreneurship. And so this is one of the trends that we have seen, is that we see an increasing number of women entrepreneurs worldwide. And so this, what it means is that what we have seen is that often women entrepreneurs have their personal and professional lives completely interconnected. And so all health or financial risk may have serious consequences on their financial independence. So like sorry, not when we see a pregnancy or a childbirth, this, if it's not adequately protected, can have serious consequences on their financial well-being. And so with that in mind, what we do is that we put in place offers that will help women entrepreneurs to stabilize their income and protection. That's
It's wonderful. There's such richness in your comments that relate to. I immediately want to follow up around how COVID has affected the financial
yes.
and health security. It has affected both. We're going to get to that in a minute, but it's a great setup. Charity, I want to maybe turn it to you. I know your business is only a year old, but thinking about pre-pandemic, kind of just the observations and kind of, how have consumer preferences, especially for women, evolved prior to the pandemic in ways that you have found specifically meaningful in the work you're doing?
Thank you very much, Janet, and greetings from Lusaka, Zambia. So before founding Digital Paygo, I was in the financial sector for about 2 decades, where I was involved in developing products, especially for the mass market, including women. So just specifically prior to the pandemic, there were certain preferences that we were seeing from the consumers that actually influenced the setup of Digital Paygo. One of it was convenience. So this side of the world, mobile penetration is very high. And so the consumer preferences was that I need a convenient product. And if it has to be convenient, deliver it through mobile. And also, they would want it accessed very easily. You see, the cost of maybe going to a place in a bank, for example, to just go and get the first generation cash in, cash out kind of financial product wasn't something that many mass market consumers would prefer, especially women. And the fact that women are very busy, we joke around here and say women have got 99 jobs. So saving a few hours in a day is really appreciated. And so that preference for convenience, easily accessible products, but also very simple, is actually the reason why Digital Paygo even set up a digital shared infrastructure to help these consumers. But something else that we've picked, especially this side, is that when you talk about the second kind of generation of financial services, payments, savings, investment, there's a preference of assisted kind of services where a lot of women would prefer face-to-face. So even though you would have e-commerce technology solutions available, the preference would always be to walk to a trader, pick up a few goods and services, pay, and probably talk to somebody, as opposed to just doing that online. And so because of that, we saw the adoption of e-commerce sort of was very slow compared to other parts of the world. And we've also seen the status of women generally, but also the lifestyle influencing their preferences for services. For example, the adult financial literacy rate here in this country, for example, is about 56%. And so that influences what kind of products they'll be looking at. So simplicity is one of the things that they all prefer. And so even as we deliver products to these consumers, that is one of the key elements to consider, because they would feel like, okay, look, maybe my life is already complicated, so just give me a very simple product. Let it be as simple as it can be so that I can easily learn, but also be able to adopt and use it. So when you look at prior to the pandemic, certain things that we saw influencing their behavior, even their expectations, was things that they really felt were important. Things like accessibility, convenience, simplicity, but also the available technology, which is mobile. And then everything that should be delivered first should be delivered through mobile. So, and for us, we came in at a time where we felt to be able to drive financial inclusion, digital financial inclusion, we needed to provide an infrastructure that would help solve for these consumers. Put in an infrastructure that can be shared, but also that makes these digital products accessible to everyone across the country was one of the key elements of even being a digital PayGo.
Fantastic. And Atul, I'm going to ask you maybe the same question, but really push it along to what have you seen pre-pandemic, but what are the bigger changes now moving into the period that we're living in? What changes have you seen in women's behavior during the pandemic that you think are potentially part of the new normal moving forward?
And thank you, everybody on the panel. I mean, obviously, the ladies on the panel are far better equipped and tuned in to talk about women empowerment. I'll give you my perspective to the best of my ability. I'll sort of start with why Scriptbox started what it did. Our whole purpose was about simplifying investments, to sort of remove all the jargon, to declutter the entire category. There were some 8,000 schemes of funds available at a point in time when we first launched. And we launched a basket of only 4 funds. And the whole intent was, how do we simplify the experience of the end consumer? So take away the mystery, take away the information arbitrage. And what's worked well for us across time is this transparency and simplicity. And though we have not targeted women specifically as part of our strategy, over 30% of our customers are women, which is a high percentage for a country like India, where most decisions, as we heard in our previous panel, are taken by men. So what's happened over time, as people have understood, as women have understood how wealth gets created, why financials are important, how to talk about money, right? Money is usually a taboo topic in most families. So to come into the change we have seen during the pandemic, post the pandemic or during that, 3 things have happened. One, people have more time. Second, they're more open to conversations. Thirdly, they're reading a lot more, right? So people are either getting WhatsApp messages or spending time in webinars or doing their own research. So a combination of just time availability, conversations, and better research, I think has led to women being more involved in financial decisions. So I won't say it's a trend yet, but we've definitely anecdotally heard that families are taking more as part of their own finances. So rather than only the man in the family, and whether it's the breadwinner or not, where even working women usually defer financial decisions to their husband, we've seen that, or their father in many cases, as the young lady earlier talked about her parents sort of saying, how will you survive? Similarly, we've seen that women tend to get influenced by the men in the family. And we hope and we believe that this pandemic gives people more time to reflect. And we've seen early trends of that happening. We've obviously been using blogs, we've been using webinars, we've been having one-on-one conversations to encourage people to do that more. We do an annual World Savings Day survey, and we have a special section where we sort of understand women's behavior better. It's very heartening to note that women make better long-term investors. So they're not looking for short-term returns. They're not looking for let's get rich quickly. They don't have the sort of gambling kind of attitude. They're more concerned about their family. So their priorities are children's education, long-term wealth creation, so which is phenomenal for wealth managers like us who are basically trying to change investing habits to be more long-term rather than short-term returns. Women are great customers for us. We're working on the trend more and more. Essentially, pandemic, I think, has highlighted the need for long-term savings, long-term investments much more. And I believe, though I can't say it's a trend, I believe women will lead this charge increasingly ahead because they think more long-term. As Charity mentioned and Lisa mentioned, they worry about the family more than themselves. And in a sense, that obviously tends to be more long-term. And that need or that desire actually fits in well with long-term wealth creation. Yeah, to cut a long story short, it's always been women who've led that feeling. And I think the pandemic has given them more time to talk to their own families, right? So because everybody's at home, you're spending time talking, you're spending time having conversations. which we believe will lead to much better behavior. We've seen that in our own portfolio. We've had our best 3 months in the last 3 months in terms of growth. The overall industry has seen a downturn because in terms of inflows, people have actually been pulling out money, which I believe is very short term. And I think that's probably more a male behavior. I don't have data to prove that, but I believe that given our increasing percentage of women in our portfolio of who invest through us, that's actually holding us in good stead. Thanks, Don.
That's great, Atul. I'm going to turn it back to Charity to maybe to build on some of those comments. Like, what are you seeing pandemic? And there's been a really interesting theme, a number of themes I'm hearing already around decision making and the changes caused by the pandemic. Charity, you brought it up. Atul, you did, and among a number of other themes that were there. But Charity, I would love to hear from you kind of what are the bigger changes that you feel you're seeing that have real implications moving towards the future beyond this pandemic period?
Yeah, quite a number of exciting changes. COVID-19 has positive and negative impacts. But one of the key things we're seeing is that self-care, self-empowerment from women. With the pandemic, a lot of women have decided to learn new skills, adopt digital channels, teach themselves so that they can look after not only themselves, but their families. We're also seeing sort of learning new behaviors. Take, for example, when you talk about payments. I earlier mentioned that they would want to go to a shop and maybe talk to a trader. But what we are seeing is that shift towards online purchases, m-commerce, and where you get these vegetables delivered. That requires trust. So we're seeing a high level of trust for the service providers, where women are saying, okay, I need this. But what we are also seeing is just going back to the basics, looking at what is really important and focusing on services that really speak to the basic needs. And so we're seeing a lot of sort of like opportunities in the health sector, looking for solutions in that value chain. But what we're also seeing is sort of just that mentality to innovate, a mindset sort of shift where I can do the same things, but I can do that differently. And just that taking it upon themselves to find solutions. So then they're looking for women for solutions that work. So if I have to do something, let me do it quickly, but let it just work and not complicate my life. But what we also then, as we have seen in the last few months, the accelerated adoption of mobile transactions, moving to wealth creation, moving to micro savings, micro lending, also being able to do all that through the comfort of their homes with this social distancing, lockdown. But importantly for us, we're seeing a need that's coming up from women to not just look at today, but to say, what is it that I can do for my family, for myself tomorrow? Tomorrow, what new skills can I pick up today that are going to be very useful in this new normal? Meaning that as service providers, as a fintech like Digital Paygo, we then begin to innovate innovations that speak to the problems that we're currently seeing need to be solved. We've also seen a lot of consumers shift to social media, and then they would want to do their payments, for example, they want to do the other financial transactions through social media. So what does that mean is that there's an expectation of having products developed like F-commerce, for example, developed for them where they spend so much of their time. Can we offer something that speaks to their lifestyle? So those are the things that we are seeing. Would they continue? Yes, obviously, a lot of the things that people learn, the good habits, people will keep them. And so going forward, wanting to have online payments, wanting to have services delivered home, to focus on wealth creation, to focus on digitalizing the health value chain, for example, is something that we'll see will carry on for some time in the future.
Many examples, but I think your point around accelerated adoption and also what I would view the accelerated need to trust service providers. Women don't have the time, so that might be, I think you use the example of delivery of vegetables or whatever, but the acceleration of new behaviors and then all of the different perspectives around the person that come into that, meaning, having to trust some of the content and still, changing how we're doing decision making. Lisa, I want to take it to you now and really talk about the changes that you've seen and build upon maybe what you've heard from Charity and Atul, and also knowing that you just actually just completed some research with Ipsos that I think has some really interesting ahas, as I would call it, from the data itself. But how have you seen kind of women's needs change based on the pandemic?
Yes, so thank you. So indeed, we conducted a survey with Ipsos, where we interview 8,000 women in 8 countries, both mature and emerging economies. And what we saw is that obviously the pandemic has brought significant changes for everyone. But for women, what we have seen is that they have been hardly hit by this crisis, that it's both an economic and a health crisis. What we have seen is that women are overrepresented in the informal sector, for instance, in most of the emerging markets. And when it comes to the service sector, which is one of the biggest hit by the crisis, women are overrepresented there as well. So indeed, with COVID-19, we can expect that the risk of vulnerability that women can face, it will be increasing. And so these are like the things for us that we need to keep in mind. In terms of key findings, I could say that we have found 3 big areas. The first, obviously, is the financial impact. We have seen that women have had to make financial and personal sacrifices when it comes to the crisis. So 47% of them had to dip into their savings. 13% of women surveyed have lost their jobs, which this has had some consequences on the quality and the quantity of food that they can have. Second, in terms of mental load, so we were talking about this part on the decision making and the increasing of the role that women can play in society, but the reality is that they are still the major caretaker, I can say, in their household. So it's one of the one that it's providing the most of the informal care within their families. And so what it was interesting for us to analyze is that indeed, over the years, women have, have increased in terms of work representation. Their income is increasing, but at the same time, what we saw is that it's not actually the fact that at the household, it was not a rebalancing of housework. But more about women outsourcing some of their previous role into external parties, nurseries, schools, and so on. And now with the lockdown, actually, we came back to probably a traditional role where women took very often the higher part in terms of housework. And so this made for them that they declare to have higher level of mental load, which with this in mind, we can say that in the future, this will have inevitably consequences in their economic, but also in the work opportunities. Finally, there is the part of, I would say, like probably the most positive look out of this is that what we saw is that in the next 6 months, women tend to have like a positive perception. So thinking that their job is going to improve, that the situation will improve as well. And with that in mind, we saw that 1 out of 5 women were having in mind actually to build their company to have a business. And this part increase even more when it comes to emerging markets. So is it either by necessity or by the willingness of launching a business? That's other questions that we need to keep in mind. But indeed, it's for us something that we need to keep in mind as how we are going to develop our offers and our services in the near future. And so I think that in terms of how these behaviors are changing, I think that today more than ever we need to still become relevant as how we target the products. So you were saying like women don't want to be in a segment, and it's exactly that, but even men. So I think that one of the key things that technology is allowing us to do is that we need to be able to tailor our offers and our services to meet our clients. And so one size does not fit all, and not for women, not for men. And so today with COVID, I think that the opportunity also rises in us to how can we tackle all the consequences of COVID through tailored products that we can provide, training programs for women entrepreneurs and so on.
It's wonderful. There's so much richness in all of your comments, and even the interplay between them. But I want to turn it to some questions that are coming from the audience. There's some really good ones here. But I want to start with asking each of the panelists. We conducted a poll while the panel's been going on so far. I'm sure you haven't seen it because you've been on the panel. But the question was, how do you think the pandemic will affect women customers, both individuals and women SMEs? And the overwhelming answer out of 4 choices was, it will almost certainly set back the progress towards women's economic power and independence. I'd love any thoughts on that. So that's what our audience is feeling, that there's much larger of a downside around setting back women and women SMEs. Thoughts around that or comments?
I'll start. So I disagree. I vehemently disagree with that. I believe this is actually a tipping point, at least in India. I think just time spent, I can probably speak for some anecdotal conversation, that this actually is a time when people realize that men need to contribute more at home. And I think the realization that working takes at home, at least the conversations we've been having, suggest that men are becoming more aware. And like you said, 66 days make a habit. And if you've been helping with household chores and with the children's education and taking the load on, I think this is going to create an environment where there is a more balanced view of a women's careers going ahead. So that need for women to take, or the common practice of women taking a back seat, and at least in India, the men building a career, hopefully it'll become more balanced. That's why I vehemently would want, actually, that this is that rather than going backwards, we actually go forwards increasingly. Similarly, I don't think there is any bias in terms of job selection or in terms of job offers. So I don't know why there would be a more impact. So one could be that women just need to look after homes more. So I'm hoping, and at least the anecdotal conversation suggests that this will lead to greater realization, greater sharing of workloads at home. Like we say, work from home and work for home. So I think the work for home will become more balanced as the work from home, and people. I think this should lead to increased participation of women in the formal workforce and building stronger careers going ahead.
Lisa,
That's
Charity, any thoughts around kind of, yeah, great. Any thoughts from you, Lisa and Charity, around setting back women kind of as a result of pandemic?
Sure, I can go.
Go ahead.
Okay.
The setback in my view is not necessarily just for women, and the factors that would lead to a setback, not necessarily a pandemic. I work with micro merchants, a majority of them who are women. So what I've seen during this time is that they've gotten into a survival mode, to want to do everything they can do to survive. And so they're learning new skills, working extra hard, trying to do things very differently because they feel a responsibility to move forward despite the challenges, the adversity. So I see that resilience in a lot of women I work with. And because of that, I feel they will actually advance. And we see a lot of them getting involved even in the education side so that they empower themselves to help themselves. So because there's that need for self-care, I think the setback really is not going to be because of pandemic, but maybe because of the effects, maybe of the value chain, supply value chain, and many other things that affects the infrastructure, that affects the economy, which I believe would affect both men and women, and not necessarily women. So for me, this experience has actually shown that women are very strong and they can do great things when there's a problem because they feel they've got a responsibility to look after the family.
Lisa, what are your thoughts on that? Nope, we're losing your audio.
Sorry, can you hear me now?
Nope, perfect. Yes, you're back.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, so I was saying that I completely agree with Charity on the point on resilience. So I adhere 1000%. I think that from every, crisis, we need to see the opportunity. And so on this, indeed, I think that today we have the opportunity that the situation on women is on the spotlight, and that this could allow us to make sure that the new normal that it's being established is going to take into account their needs and expectations. And so with this in mind, to have a more equal workplace and even flexible hours for both men and women. So that for me, it's one thing. In terms of like the downsides and what can be one of the risks, for me, I see it in terms of women's health. So if we look at what has been in the past, Ebola or Zika epidemics have shown us that maternal mortality, for instance, have increased because all the resources were diverted towards the epidemic. And so I think that these are I will say points of attention for us to keep in mind, and that making sure that COVID-19 will not be, a third experience, but rather the exception, where we are making sure that women's needs are going to be taken into account, and that in terms of their resilience and financial independence, we are making everything that we can to secure them.
It's wonderful. Charity, I have a question for you that came from the audience. It's also probably relevant for our other panelists. Charity, you brought up the increased need for trust. How can financial institutions build that when personal touch seems to be decreasing given the pandemic? Very interesting thinking about the role of technology and personal touch, but as it relates to trust. Any thoughts on that, Charity?
Sure. And I think what financial institutions can do to build that trust is, one, when they deliver a service, first of all, it must be reliable. And for you to build trust, information is very key. So there's a preference from consumers to be having real-time information so that they know what's happening, they're involved in the decision-making process. But most importantly, there's certain things they can do themselves, like self-service. So if there's reliability, information, transparency, then trust levels are built. So I think that's what financial institutions should endeavor to do, be able to be very transparent in the way they're delivering the service, but also even after sales support.
Great. Atul, I think you wanted to say something on the last question, but I'd also be interested in any brief thoughts that you have on that question that Charity just answered around how do we increase trust when it's more of a tech-driven kind of world.
Thank you. Yeah, so I was just adding that I think the fact that employers have realized that you don't need people in office all the time actually opens up a lot of vistas for working women, right? One of the reasons we've seen that women take a break is they need to be at home and they can't be in office. So flexible working hours, the fact that remote working actually works, right? And there are challenges in some facts. I think actually is a very powerful message for everybody, right? That you don't have to be in situ all the time to be effective. So I think the fact that we were able to make this work for all of us for the last 6 months and probably another 6 months and going forward, actually in my mind opens up a lot more opportunities. That the new normal actually is people working from where they want for however long they want. I think that for me is actually far more powerful for women than for men because they need to take care of children, for example, and this gives women who've chosen to have a child to come back to work at a much faster pace than traditionally. So I'll close with that. I just wanted to add that point. In terms of trust, I completely agree with Charity. It's all about the trust markers are around transparency, absolute ease and convenience, and a lot of information. So if you are not only the how should be simple, the why should be equally simple. Why are you pricing the way you are? Why are you choosing, in our case, the funds you are suggesting? Why do you doing that? So as long as you are being non-condescending and you're being using jargon-free language, but being very, very explanatory. So for us, trust markers come from convenience, come from transparency, come from richness of information, come from choice, right? Trust is choice is obviously very, very important. You shouldn't be just handed something and say, do it this way. Taking customers on the journey is all, and all can this can be done through technology, right? It doesn't need necessarily a human interface. You can actually enable all of these experiences completely digitally, and more so on the mobile because people are able to interact much more with their own hands and do that. So yeah, trust is critical, and I think it's imperative for a financial services brand to build that trust. And obviously, the last thing, and last but not the least, is ethical behavior in every aspect of ethics, not only the big E ethics, but the small E ethics, the kind of work you do in the community, the things you say, the way you behave, have all to be honorable and honest. And that's really important to build trust. You can't be saying one thing and doing something else. So it's very, very important that financial services companies take their social responsibility very, very seriously to be trusted. Yeah, that adds on to what Charity was saying.
It's great. What a great set of points. We're at our time now. Charity, Lisa Atul, I want to thank you for your fantastic comments and perspective. I'm going to put out a plug. This is such an interesting topic. I think we could have talked about this for an hour or so. The implications for the changes that we're seeing around the accelerated rate of behavior, the accelerated adoption of different technologies, the cognitive load, how we think about trust, and how we think about well-being as it relates to health and financial, all are greatly informed by the pandemic. So it's been a super interesting conversation. I'd like to put a plug. Actually, it would be great to, at this conference next year, to revisit this topic and see which of these implications have really come to bear, hopefully in a post-pandemic world. But I want to thank you all. I want to thank all of our observers, listeners, and joiners, and Charity, Lisa Atul, great talking with you. So thanks, everybody. Thanks.